We have a development crisis right now on Long Island. Every development in Nassau and Suffolk has been put on hold because of this issue with National Grid and the natural gas. I was fortunate. I asked National Grid to come before all of the Nassau and Suffolk elected officials and answer our questions about 2 weeks ago. We invited 110 state, federal, town, and county officials in, and National Grid was nice enough to answer questions. We hammered them for about an hour to explain what's happening. Now, my question, how is the Public Service Commission expecting Con Ed and National Grid to continue to deal with the demand if they're telling us that the supply isn't there? If you could address that. I know that's kind of the million-dollar question at the moment, but developments on Long Island, as I mentioned, aren't going anywhere. I have 1,450 units in my district that it's on pause.
So, without ducking the question, let me first point out that it's actually a sister agency that currently has the main decision to make with respect to the pipeline that would affect chunks of Queen and all of Nassau and Suffolk, the so-called Nessie pipeline. That's the Department of Environmental Conservation that have, on May 15th, I think, or 16th, they found water quality violations that were grounds for a denial on the basis of the numbers submitted by the company. So that's ongoing. The company has revised its numbers, which in the company's views would bring it into compliance. So that's a decision about the pipeline.
Now, as I understand it, they did an independent audit to prove to we, the state, that they actually needed this pipeline. That was provided to the Public Service Commission. Is that correct? An independent audit?
So there is an ongoing report to assess the reality of the supply-demand imbalance. It applies both to portions of Westchester, most of the Con Ed portions of Westchester, as well as to the Long Island areas that I mentioned. That report is being finalized, but it's certainly true ahead of that report that supply-demand is tight.
Now, because they tell us on the 10 to 15 coldest days of the year, they're actually trucking in natural gas, and their largest customer on Long Island is LIPA, is PSEG LIPA, and on those 10 to 15 coldest days, as the previous speaker mentioned, they have an interruptible source. They switch to oil so that the residential portion can be serviced.
And that's by design. We like the generators. Everybody in New York ought to like the generators to be interruptible.
Correct, the redundancy.
But let me kind of go back to some of your earlier question. So, there's the Public Service Commission has some ability to act in these situations. We can work with companies when there are things like compressor solutions. So I believe, I don't believe you were here, but Tim Cawley from Con Ed mentioned
it at the end,
a couple of times on a couple of instances on the Iroquois and on the Tennessee pipeline. So that involves, well, can I spend money? And that's a question to the PSC. And then I mentioned to Chair Paulin that the demand side of things is very important as well. And that by providing alternatives to gas, either tightening up the home or the business, the building.
And if I could just interrupt you, because I don't want to take up the committee's time too much. Was there a report submitted? Because they're telling us they submitted a report in July.
They submitted one by an engineering company,
okay,
a reputed engineering company, and the state is finalizing its own independent. I believe the
because I think it would help us to know what that report says to
the,
form an opinion.
The grid report?
They're saying it was independently done and submitted to the Public
Correct.
Service Commission.
I believe that's a public document. I can make sure you get a copy.
That would be excellent.
Okay.
I would like to see what
I'm
that
sorry,
says.
I misunderstood.
No,
because we have our own independent analysis going on.
So on Long Island, solar is something that is more than just something that wealthy people put on their homes and feel good about the environment. It's good for the environment, but also it saves our ratepayers on Long Island significantly. They can put the system on their home, they can own it, after 15 years pay it off, and then have maybe no electric bill. Now the state, we're moving to a feeder system that rather than net metering. Do we know how that's going to be reimbursed at this time? there's questions about that. I've spoken with the Environmental Conservation Chair, Steve Engelbright, on that. And our solar companies on Long Island are very concerned. Businesses and residents who have installed this on their homes made a significant contribution. It's good for the environment, but we're getting killed with some of the highest electric bills in the country, as my colleague just mentioned, even though we're using less.
So I'm not sure, so very quickly, anybody that's already put the solar on is going to be grandfathered with the deal that they have. There is no taking away or clawing back or undoing being contemplated. I'm not sure we could do that if we chose to. And in respect of changing the rules on a go forward basis, we're thinking about that topic. There's an open proceeding in which we're getting a lot of comments from various different sides. There's an environmental set of arguments that go one way, a set of social equity arguments that go another way. But I can assure you that we may or may not change things. If we change things, we're going to be careful, and the word we use is gradualist, like not fast.
Thank you on that, because community solar, as my colleague Mr. Carroll mentioned, is something that constituents that live in my district, that live in apartments, it's great that they can own a piece of it out maybe eastern Long Island and still enjoy the benefit and also do something great for our environment.
They're right to have that attitude.